Hello, and welcome to the Arts Our Education Talk It Up podcast, where we talk to arts educator leaders who are working to advance equitable arts education for all students nationwide. I'm Jim Palmarini, your host. And just to know, the Arts Our Education campaign is sponsored by the National Coalition for Art Standards, a network of 10 national organizations dedicated to advancing rigorous standards for K-12 arts education. So today we are going to be talking about the Connected Arts Project, the Connected Arts Network Project, that is otherwise known as CAN. CAN is a 5-year initiative launched in 2022 dedicated to creating virtual professional learning communities, PLCs, nationwide with educators in dance, music, theater, and visual and media arts. CAN is sponsored by the National Art Education Association in partnership with the Educational Theater Association, the National Association for Music Education, yes, the National Dance Education Organization, and is fully funded by the U.S. Department of Education Assistance for Arts Education Program grant. So, the overarching vision for CAN is to build a sustainable model of professional learning for arts educators in public schools and public charters to strengthen their pedagogy, instruction, and leadership skills in order to better serve students through a lens of, this is a shorthand here, you can read the full text, students to better serve them and through the development of highly effective educators, teachers themselves trained to become local and national education leaders, partnerships through schools, local education agencies, and national arts associations, and resources, yes, that include accessible instructional materials, strategies, and toolkits through 3 specific capacity building focus areas. That is equity, diversity, and inclusion, EDI, social and emotional learning, SEL, and teacher leadership. So today, we are so fortunate to know that the CAN project was modeled after the successful structure of a professional learning community program in New York City, launched in 2022 with 60 dance, music, theater, and visual and media arts K-12 education teachers from across the country, under the guidance of 8 of the New York program teacher leaders and 5 PLC leaders. And speaking of PLC leaders, we are so fortunate to have 2 of those leaders here for a short conversation. Josh Schroeder, an assistant professor of theater education at Emerson College and the PLC leader for theater. Welcome, Josh. Good to see you.
Great to be here with you today, Jim. Thank you.
And you're an old friend, and I'm glad to see you. And Amy Appleton, who serves as in a dual capacity as CAN project leader, project director, and the PLC leader for visual and media arts. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much.
All right, so let's get started with our conversation. Enough yakking from me. I'm going to stop my share. We'll get back to that later. So, just to start with this, how do you think participating CAN teachers are directly impacted in their classroom practice? Let's just start with you, Josh. You can talk broadly, but you can also talk about theater educators as well that you've worked with.
Yeah. So one of the things that we often find across the U.S. with theater educators is they're the only person in the building, sometimes flying solo or programs of one. And so this provides an opportunity for folks to come together virtually. And so they're building community. And in those community conversations, which are centered around professional learning, learning new strategies, we have the opportunity to learn something together and then go back to our own individual classrooms, try it out, and then come back together and talk about how it went. And so I think that opportunity for folks that feel sometimes alone and sometimes feel like they're not getting professional learning opportunities at their district level specific to theater. They're sometimes in with other arts teachers or maybe even other subject areas. They have an opportunity to get professional learning that directly speaks to them as theater teachers.
Trish, let me follow up a little bit there. So are they also at the same time having an impact within the school just to demonstrate the level of leadership that extends beyond just that theater stage or the black box theater?
Yeah, I think definitely, because one of the things that we're thinking a lot about in the grant is how folks become activators and advocates and facilitators, not just to amplify student voice and share what their students are doing, but the power of the arts and the power of rethinking how we do professional learning and have professional conversations and reflect together in really nuanced and critical ways. And so I think all of those are part of leadership skills that can be shared at individual district or in an individual school that can support others no matter what subject they teach.
I love this because it so puts the arts in the center of the conversation, and in the post-pandemic environment, that seems to be so important. So Amy, to you now, what do you have to say about how this has been for visual arts? For theater, for your educators.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
For visual and media artists that we're working with, so we're currently calling this cohort our teacher leaders. So the teacher leaders already are coming into this project with leadership experience, whether it's in their art form or in their school or district. So we're building on that, but then also providing a reciprocal opportunity for them to learn from each other. And I think that's what's really impacting classroom practice, because they're able to bring something that they might be challenged with or some kind of instructional practice that they want to implement but need some more support with. And to Josh's point, don't necessarily have the arts peers in their school or district to bounce ideas off of. So that's really why these professional learning communities exist virtually, so that we can go across states, across a lot of different things, time zones, so that they can get the support that they need from their peers. And we've been seeing that through what we're calling action research, but really it's just developing a line of inquiry around a particular topic that could use improvement. And I think what's unique about CAN is that even though our goal is to develop professional learning communities, there's the bigger why there. It's around equity, diversity, and inclusion and social emotional learning, which I'm sure we'll get to more, but that helps direct the thought processes and what kind of instructional change we're looking for.
So that's great, because in a way that takes me right to my next question, which, how does CAN's emphasis on EDI and SEL impact arts educators' content knowledge of their discipline? Is that really changing how broadly they think about, for example, Josh, what's really important in, let's say, in theater, in storytelling, let's say, or different kinds of characters that you might see on a stage? Josh?
Yeah, I think that sometimes with theater educators, we may say, oh, well, we're reading this play, and so check the box, we've done the goal of diversity, equity, and inclusion, rather than saying, what are the practices or pedagogies that we are using in a consistent manner that is intentional, that create opportunities for us to have some really nuanced and interesting conversations. So I'm going to talk about one as an example. We had a guest speaker this year called Bliss Griffin, or her name is Bliss Griffin, and came and spoke to us about some ways to impart diversity, equity, and inclusion in our classroom. And one of the things that she shared with us, specifically thinking about characters, was how we might talk about how stereotypes are built into characters and archetypes, and then how we put that over here. But then we talk about what are the other qualities of the character that are not visual or about the body, and how when we cast a role, we might really talk about the qualities of the character that aren't related to stereotype or archetype. And that can translate to the plays we're reading. That can translate into how we cast in after school performances. that can translate into how we talk about in other forms, like how it shows up in media and how it shows up in daily life. And I think the impact of that is that conversation influences other conversations, and we can come back to that, is a way to think about equity and diversity through practice, not just a checkbox of I did it today, I don't have to ever return to that.
So another follow-up question, does that almost implicitly lead to some impact in social and emotional learning at the same time, to turn the character building process, let's say, on its head a little bit?
Yeah, I think definitely.
For some students, yeah.
Yeah, and I think for social emotional learning, some of the central pieces of that are around identity and agency and student voice and belonging. And through that conversation, students start to unpack some of those things and also start to either see themselves reflected or sometimes even have that opportunity to play with aesthetic distance, right? We can talk about the play or the character, and that's the play or the character. We can have some really rich, deep conversations rather than saying, how does this impact you in the world? And so I think that story can be really powerful, and we're able to talk about the identity of the characters rather than our own identity sometimes. And then at the end, we turn it back onto ourselves.
Oh, that's so cool. So Amy, for visual arts and media arts, how is that playing out to incorporate SEL and EDI into their content knowledge for them? Any thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, this has been about a year-long process for us at this point. And what we really noticed in the first year is we had to start with the individual journey, which was exactly what Josh was just saying. That can be really hard. So thinking about every individual coming up from a different standpoint, a different cultural background, different knowledge around equity, diversity, and inclusion, that was important to dig into first, and to create a community within the PLC that encouraged bravery around talking about personal stories and personal identity. So that took a lot longer than we originally anticipated, but rightly so. And we spent the time there before then connecting. Now, how are we going to work in the classroom with students around these culturally relevant topics? So we've talked about things like, what is culture? What does that even mean or look like in the classroom? What is the culture of right now? What are student culture? Who are the students in your classroom? Who do they think they are? Who do others think they are? And these are all kind of questions we've been grappling with, because if we don't know who's in the room, we can't be culturally responsive or culturally relevant. And that's something that takes some extra thoughts as we're creating, as visual artists and media artists, some of the artists that we're looking at. Let's make sure that they're contemporary, that they're reflecting the background of the students in the room, so they can make those touch points, those entry points, and be inspired to create art based on that artist.
So just to dig a little deeper into that in a really practical level, is that partly about, what constitutes art making and what constitutes this is art, whether it's, tagging the side of a boxcar versus, a sculpture that is reflective of a particular culture and not another. And I'm riffing on this now. My own wife is a visual arts educator, so we talk about this all the time. Amy, other thoughts? I'm just trying to dig a little deeper into this.
Right. I think when we talk about culture, sometimes it gets into that dangerous territory of what is cultural appreciation versus appropriation.
Yes,
so that,
yes.
I think I got where you're coming from. That is a topic that's relevant. It's important that we are not looking at an artist or their work or their culture and trying to emulate that as if it's ours, but trying to appreciate that, to say, okay, this person is bringing up this particular story around their own background or life. Now let me reflect on my own story and my background, and what art can I make around this story. So it's about skill building. We're still teaching how to make art, but there's a bigger theme there. It's more about creating, we're not just making a collage to make a collage. We're putting materials together to get at a bigger picture, a bigger story, and trying to get as much of the identity of the student in that story as possible.
So in a way, we're sort of dancing around this question, and in a way you've sort of addressed it, but can you just give me an example of how let's say an arts educator, Amy, visual arts educator or a media person, is creating or has created a more accessible classroom for their students? Because that's in some of the verbiage of the shared CAN materials. Can you share something about that?
Yeah, so we're still getting to the point where we're creating curriculum together. Right now, we're still in that kind of inquiry process of figuring out where we can make some tweaks and changes. But I know one of the conversations that came up was around this kind of like curriculum around sculpture and relief and creating communities. And many times visual arts classes are used as places for students to be visionaries. What do you want to see in your community, or something to that effect? And in this case, it was about building. It started as a house, and I think when the PLC group got together to talk about doing a visionary example of a house for someone who may not have their own house. What if we're talking to a student who we don't know what their situation is at home? Do we really want to focus on that? And that kind of really thoughtful reflection was so helpful for the group. And I was just a witness to this. It was really the arts educators putting their heads together to say, let's try to pull back on that idea and talk more about community. Maybe it could be a collaborative project and students end up working together on it. So I can't even tell you exactly how it ended, because it's all just constant process building within these smaller groups together.
So just to follow up on that, because I heard the word intentionality earlier, I think that Josh mentioned that. The power here of community. So those visual arts educators came together and talked about this, I assume, and came to some agreement about the intentionality. Does that make sense? Something like that about what they were doing?
Mm-hmm. Yes, everything was very intentional in terms of how we're structuring our conversations and seeing what the educators bring to the table.
Josh, do you have any thoughts about the accessibility thing? Because theater is inherently community building, but leveraging that a little farther.
Yeah, one of the things that our theater group talked about early on, as Amy is mentioning, is we took a lot of time to get to know who was in the room, who was in the PLC. Is many of our theater teachers that we're working with, the teacher leaders at the moment, have blended classrooms. So there are all different kinds of students in their classroom, but specifically students that have exceptionalities or that learn in different ways, that are learning alongside and in the same classroom as their peers. And that's a really exciting thing to think about, right? Where we're at in American education, where we as arts educators are really able to serve all students. That also has some challenges with that. And one of the things that we had some learning around was choice boards, and how we can provide and differentiate a theater strategy, using a choice board or using choice. And the theater team was really excited about this. And then we started to think about and create together, what would a choice board look like if we were doing pantomime or gesture work with students in the classroom? And we decided to even start with pantomime or gesture because that is something that we use in kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. Right. The idea of creating a choice board together as a group, kind of like Amy was saying, what her visual artists were thinking about and creating together, right? We could all move away into our own context, all 17 of us, and have a tool that we could use literally to make content and skill-based development more accessible to some of our learners, specifically some of our nonverbal students in the classroom.
So I'm going to throw a curveball question at you, not totally. So in all of this process, and reinventing and imagining EDI and social and emotional learning. How have standards played a role in this work? Have they been a touchstone for these educators as well? Who wants to take that one? Go ahead. How about you, Amy?
Well, I was going to say Josh is all about standards. No, I can do it. We are really focusing on the National Core Art Standards. So there's a common touch point there when it comes to talking about standards. I think all of the educators we're working with are coming from their state standard knowledge.
Right.
So that's really been helpful to give us a common language when we're discussing how the practices that we're trying to incorporate or embed into the curriculum, why are we doing this? Where is this coming from? How does this connect to the standards? So, I'm in New York City, so I am also someone who is more connected at this point, or prior to Can at least, to the state and city standards in New York. And one of the benefits of that is we have a state standard on culturally responsive, sustaining education. And I'm sure some of these points exist within the National Core Art Standards too, but I know I can at least speak for myself from that. Being able to connect with other educators around standards-based instruction has been so helpful for my own work to be able to connect these ideas. And I think when standards are written in that way, where you're really focusing on culture of students, and in this case, we have social emotional learning, all goes together. I sort of see culturally responsive teaching and education as putting ED&I and cell practices under the same umbrella. There's a lot of overlap there. So we have a couple of individuals you mentioned at the top who are coming from New York City, since that's where Can got its start. So these educators, there's 2 per PLC, who kind of help support the work because they've been doing this for a longer period of time. And they've been also able to help us connect to this culturally responsive, sustaining pedagogy of teaching, and how we're connecting teaching to this bigger picture.
Josh, your thoughts about the standards question?
Yeah, I would add that the National Core Art Standards, they have 2 goals, and one is to promote artistic literacy. In the same way we think about all different kinds of literacies, financial literacy, digital literacy, etc. That it's rooted in helping students create, perform, respond, etc. in order to do something else. And we're not in theater trying to make every student a Broadway star, if you will. So the goal of some of that work is it's really inquiry based. Right. And so it allows us to explore through a constructivist method, and explore in a way that students can try and fail and learn and adapt and identify some ways that they're entering into the work. And I think that therefore, if we use that approach, it can be more student-centered than some other approaches. And we use those standards is a guideline to help develop some of that inquiry.
Here's another question. In our post-pandemic era of education, if I might put it that way, do you think there is a particular urgency and even, relevance and urgency to this project to help students reemerge themselves still now back into the classroom in the broadest possible way, given the emphasis on SEL and EDI? Is it more important than ever, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
I'd love to take that one, because we just did a Can presentation the other day and highlighted a quote by Dr. Goldie Muhammad on this exact topic. So if you don't mind indulging me, I have it up right here. And she says, "We live in a period where there's no time for urgent-free pedagogy. Our instruction pursuits must be honest, bold, raw, unapologetic, and responsive to the social times." And this is something we're finding in Can 100%, and why we're bringing Dr. Muhammad in to speak with us, because she has a pedagogy and a framework for building concepts into curriculum planning that we're hoping to do as well. But I think that idea of Yes, there is urgency behind this. And yes, we're going to stay focused on our mission to embed these practices in the classroom because A, it's already happening. Art is inherently a place for students to build these social skills. And it's also so incredibly important in the times that we're in right now.
I love the quote. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Josh?
I would add that a PLC, a professional learning community, which is different than a grade level team meeting or going to a professional learning seminar. A PLC is really emergent, right? What is the need of our community, of our students in this moment? And I think that using the PLC or the professional learning community model allows us to speak to what do teachers and students need right now, and how do we as an organization provide some of the structural framework, some of the supports through materials or speakers or resources that can help leverage a teacher's positional power in the classroom to make a difference. And that's what this is all about, is we have amazing arts and educators, and how do we support them and help them continue to grow and learn through what is the need right now.
That leads me to a couple of closing questions. One is simply, why would a really busy teacher, well, you back up. This reminds me when we were writing the new standards and they came out and people were like, oh, I'm going to have to reinvent my curriculum. You know, why do I want to do it? No, you're a great teacher. Here is a way for you to become even better at what you do. So my fundamental question is, what do you say to a really busy arts educator? Because there's still time. Here comes the advertisement. Yes, you can apply to become a Connected Arts Network teacher in the coming year until November the 13th. So what do you say to that teacher who is thinking about applying, but it's like, oh, one more thing. Why would I want to do this? What do you say to them? Amy, go at it.
Sure. Yes. So bring on the pitch. We have applications open until November 13th. And like we were mentioning, the teacher leaders that are involved now are looking for teacher participants to work with them in professional learning communities. So first of all, it's not as much of a requirement or a commitment as what the teacher leaders have been taking on. So something we're trying to be mindful of is the fact that everyone has a lot on their plate right now. There's a lot going on in schools, and we're very understanding of that. There's also an importance in spending time on professional growth. So we're definite advocates for that, and that this space really can just be a lower commitment way of making sure that you're connecting with other arts educators. It's about a once a month commitment in terms of meetings. And then the reflection that's happening outside of those meetings is really, how are you changing or improving what's happening in the arts environment that you teach in? So I would encourage that process, that it doesn't have to seem overwhelming, that there are things that are optional about CAN. There's really a lot of choice that we're trying to build into this. And the main requirement are these monthly touch points that we have with peers.
I would add that every time I leave a PLC meeting, Connected Arts Network meeting, I feel energized. I feel ready to try something new. I feel supported by my peers and colleagues. And what I like about this project is we sometimes feel that after a workshop, or maybe a few days when we go to a conference or a learning opportunity. This is actually, you get that touch point, as Amy's mentioning, every month for an extended amount of time. And so you're building community with those folks that both can provide ideas and support you, but you actually get to build that community year after year after year. And so therefore, it's not just what am I teaching, who's in the room, but through the relationship building you're doing over time, you can really get into some nuanced conversations. This is a question I'm really wrestling with, or I know that you work in a rural area across the state. Could you share with me some strategies that you found to engage families or students in this around this thing, right? And so I think that coming back to something and someone can feel actually like home or refreshing or rejuvenating, or can feel centering in a very busy school year. And to know that you're going to have a community, not just this school year, but the following school year too, I think can be really exciting.
This has been wonderful, because what I hear from both of you is, yes, there's a lot of learning taking place, but there is also the opportunity to reaffirm the professionalism of arts educators, that they are not alone, and that their well-being, their social and emotional needs are important and are being nurtured through the CAN network. I want to thank you both. Any final comments that you want to add?
Thank you so much for having us here. Thanks for helping share the word about the important work that we're doing. We really appreciate it.
And I am grateful that you are here. Josh, good to see you, my old friend. So if you want to learn more about the Connected Arts Network, you can at www.artseducators.org/promo CAN, or interested in being part of CAN, visit this page, learn more. That is, you can scan that QR code. It will take you right to everything you want to know. And let me just say, there is so much amazing content, interviews, podcasts, lots of details, town halls that will bring you up to speed all about CAN. But the applications closes on November the 13th, so you'll want to do this soon. So at that, I'm going to stop sharing and say thank you once again, Amy, Josh. See you on the avenues.